The sound of pickaxes striking stone echoed through the canyon as Katherine Wilson wiped sweat from her brow. The blazing Colorado sun beating down mercilessly on Broken Ridge mining camp. It was 1876, 2 years since she'd arrived at this desolate outpost following her father's death, determined to make something of the claim he'd staked but never lived to see flourish. The men called her Widow Wilson behind her back, though she'd never married. It was simply easier for them to believe a woman would only be at a mining camp because she had nowhere else to go. "Miss Wilson, supply wagon's coming," young Tommy Fletcher called out, his voice cracking with adolescence as he ran past her tent. Katherine straightened her faded blue work dress and adjusted the kerchief, keeping her chestnut hair from her face. Supply day was the closest thing to civilization they got out here, 30 miles from the nearest proper town of Leavenworth, Colorado. She'd become the camp's unofficial quartermaster, keeping inventory and ensuring the miners didn't squander their earnings on whiskey before securing necessities. The wagon approached in a cloud of dust, but Katherine's attention was drawn to something unusual: a rider alongside it. Men occasionally passed through, but this one rode tall in the saddle, his posture suggesting military training. As they drew closer, she could make out a weather-beaten cowboy hat and the glint of what might have been a marshal's badge. "Miss Wilson," called old Sam Jenkins, the supply wagon driver. "Brought you something extra today. This here's Wade Remington. Says he's looking for someone." Katherine approached cautiously. The camp housed 37 men of varying degrees of trustworthiness, and strangers typically meant trouble. "Madam," the stranger said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. A jagged scar ran along his jawline. "Wade Remington. I'm tracking a man who might have passed through here." "We get many passing through," Katherine replied, keeping her tone businesslike. "Who are you looking for?" "Fellow named Jed Turner. Robbed a bank in Denver, killed 2 people." His voice was deep with a slight Texas drawl. Something in her expression must have changed because his eyes narrowed slightly. "You know him," Wade said. It wasn't a question. Katherine swallowed hard. "He was here about 3 weeks back, called himself John Taylor. Stayed 2 nights, then disappeared with Mac Gregor's gold pouch and Simmons' best pistol." Wade Remington nodded slowly. "That sounds like Turner." "You a marshal?" she asked, noticing now that what she'd taken for a badge was actually a bounty hunter's license. "Bounty hunter," he confirmed. "And if Turner was here 3 weeks ago, I'm already behind." Sam Jenkins interrupted. "Miss Wilson, we should unload before the day gets any hotter." She nodded, turning back to the practical matters at hand. "Mr. Remington, you're welcome to water your horse and rest a bit. We don't have proper accommodations, but I'll manage, madam," he said, dismounting with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "And maybe you could point me in the direction Turner headed when he left." As Katherine directed the unloading of supplies: flour, coffee, ammunition, tools, she found her eyes continually drifting to the tall stranger. Something about his presence disrupted the careful balance she'd established in the camp. The miners watched him warily, especially when he started asking questions. By evening, Wade Remington had decided to stay the night. Katherine allowed him to set up camp near her tent, which sat slightly apart from the others. It was an arrangement the miners had insisted upon for propriety's sake, though she suspected it was more to distance themselves from her bookkeeping and occasional scoldings about their more reckless behaviors. "Miss Wilson," Wade said as she handed him a tin plate of beans and salt pork, "I'm curious what brings a woman like you to a place like this." She stiffened. "A woman like me, educated, well-spoken." His eyes met hers across the small fire. "Out of place." "This claim was my father's," she answered after a moment. "He died before he could work it. I came to sell it, then discovered no one would buy it for what it's worth." "So you stayed to prove its value." There was a note of admiration in his voice. "I stayed because I had nowhere else to go," Katherine replied, though it wasn't entirely true. She had an aunt in Boston who'd offered her a place, but the thought of living as a dependent being pushed towards suitable marriages had been unbearable after tasting independence. "And now?" Wade asked. "Now I own a 20% share in the entire operation. The men needed someone who could read and write, keep accounts, negotiate with buyers. Turns out I'm better at that than most." Wade nodded, consuming his meal with the efficiency of a man accustomed to eating when food was available, regardless of quality. Still, it must be lonely. The observation struck closer to home than Katherine cared to admit. "I'm too busy to be lonely, Mr. Remington." But that night, lying on her narrow cot, she found herself acutely aware of the stranger sleeping just yards away. His presence had somehow made her loneliness more pronounced, like a pain that only hurts when acknowledged. Morning came with the usual cacophony of men preparing for a day in the mines. Katherine rose early, heating water over her small stove for coffee. She was surprised to find Wade already awake, tending to his horse. "You're leaving?" she asked, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "Got a man to catch," he replied, though he didn't seem in a particular hurry. "Though I was hoping I might trouble you for some coffee before I go." She invited him to her fire, pouring the strong brew into a tin cup. "The men said Turner headed south toward Arizona territory." Wade nodded. "That's what I figured. He's got family down that way." A sudden commotion from the main camp interrupted their conversation. Shouts and the sound of running feet drew their attention. One of the younger miners, Pete Dawson, came sprinting toward them. "Miss Wilson." "It's Jenkins. He's been hurt bad in the new shaft." Katherine was on her feet instantly. "What happened?" "Cave in. He's trapped, bleeding something awful." Wade was already moving. "Show me." They followed Pete to the newest tunnel, where a group of miners stood helplessly before a partially collapsed entrance. Through a narrow opening, they could hear Sam Jenkins' pained groans. "Anyone tried to get in there?" Wade asked, assessing the damage. "Too unstable," replied Mercer, the oldest of the miners. "Whole thing could come down." Wade was already removing his coat. "Miss Wilson, you have any medical supplies?" "Some," she answered, already mentally inventorying what she had. "Not enough for something serious." "Get what you have," he instructed, then turned to the miners. "I need 3 men with steady nerves and strong backs." For the next hour, Katherine watched as Wade directed a careful excavation, shoring up weak points and creating a passage just wide enough for a man to crawl through. When it was ready, he insisted on being the first to enter. "I've done this before," he told the others. "In the war." Katherine felt her heart in her throat as he disappeared into the dark opening, dragging a rope behind him. The minutes stretched unbearably until his voice called out, "I've got him. He's alive, but his leg's crushed. Start pulling, slow and steady." When they finally extracted Jenkins, Katherine gasped at the sight. The older man's right leg was a mangled mess below the knee, bone visible through torn flesh. Wade emerged last, covered in dirt and sweat. "He needs a doctor," Wade said grimly. "That leg needs to come off before infection sets in." "Nearest doctor's in Leavenworth," Mercer said. "He'll never make it." Katherine stepped forward. "My father was a doctor. I assisted him many times." All eyes turned to her. "You ever removed a limb, Miss Wilson?" Wade asked quietly. "No," she admitted. "But I've seen it done. I know the procedure." Wade studied her face for a long moment. "Then I'll assist you. I've held men down while field surgeons worked during the war." The next few hours were the most harrowing of Katherine's life. With Wade's help, she converted her tent into a makeshift surgery, boiling her father's old medical instruments that she'd kept more for sentimental value than practical use. The men contributed their whiskey for sterilization and anesthesia. "You sure about this?" Wade asked as they prepared, Jenkins unconscious from pain and whiskey. Katherine met his gaze, drawing strength from the confidence she saw there. "No, but he'll die without it." "Then we do what needs doing," Wade replied simply. The amputation was brutal, bloody work. Katherine's hands remained steady even as her stomach threatened to rebel. Wade proved invaluable, applying pressure when needed, wiping away blood, and most importantly, never doubting her abilities even when she doubted herself. When it was done, with Jenkins still breathing and the bleeding controlled, Katherine stepped outside her tent and promptly vomited behind a nearby boulder. She felt a warm hand on her back. "You did good," Wade said softly. "That man's alive because of you." She wiped her mouth with a trembling hand. "We don't know if he'll survive the night. Maybe not. But you gave him a chance he wouldn't have had otherwise." That night, they took turns watching over Jenkins. During Katherine's shift, the old man briefly regained consciousness. "Miss Wilson," he croaked, "did you cut off my leg?" "Yes, Mr. Jenkins." "I'm sorry, but don't be sorry," he interrupted weakly. "Better to live with one leg than die with two." He drifted back to sleep, and Katherine felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders. When Wade came to relieve her, their hands touched briefly as she passed him a cup of coffee. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. "You should rest," he said. "You've done enough." "So have you," she replied. "Yet here you are, still helping." He shrugged. "Turner's already got a 3-week head start. Another day won't matter much." "Why are you really tracking him?" Katherine asked suddenly. "It seems personal." Wade was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "He killed my partner," he finally said. "Shot him in the back during that bank robbery. I'm sorry. Been tracking him for 3 months now." Wade's face was half shadowed in the dim light. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever catch him." "You will," Katherine said with unexpected certainty. "You seem like a man who finishes what he starts." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You've known me all of one day, Miss Wilson." "Sometimes a day is all it takes to measure a person's character," she replied. Their eyes held for a moment before Katherine broke the connection, suddenly aware of how forward she was being. "I should try to sleep." "Yes, you should," Wade agreed softly. Jenkins survived the night, and by morning his fever had broken. The miners, impressed by Katherine's medical skills and Wade's quick thinking, treated them both with newfound respect. "Never seen nothing like that," Mercer told the others. "Miss Wilson's got more grit than most men I know." Wade, who had planned to leave, found reason after reason to delay. First, Jenkins needed monitoring. Then there was the matter of the collapsed tunnel that needed proper reinforcement. And finally, he discovered that one of the miners had encountered Turner more recently than Katherine had initially thought. "Seems your man passed through a camp about 10 miles south of here just a week ago," she told Wade on his 3rd evening at Broken Ridge. "That narrows your search considerably." "It does," he agreed, poking at the fire between them. "I should head out tomorrow." "Yes, you should," Katherine said, though the words felt hollow. Wade studied her across the flames. "You know, in all my years riding, I've never seen anything like what you've built here." "What do you mean? These men respect you." "Not just because you're the only woman for 50 miles, but because you've earned it." He gestured toward the camp. "You've created something rare out here, a place where people look out for each other." Katherine felt a surge of pride. "They're good men, most of them. Just trying to make their way, same as anyone." "And what about you, Katherine?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart beat faster. "What are you trying to make? A life," she answered honestly. "One where I don't need anyone's permission or approval." Wade nodded slowly. "That's a worthy aim. And you, what happens after you find Turner?" His expression darkened slightly. "I bring him to justice after that." He shrugged. "Haven't thought much beyond that point." "Perhaps you should," Katherine suggested gently. The next morning, Wade prepared to leave. The entire camp came to see him off, unusual for men who typically paid little attention to comings and goings. "You ever need work, Remington, there's a place for you here," offered Mercer, who'd become the de facto leader since Jenkins' injury. "Appreciate that," Wade replied, shaking hands all around. Katherine stood slightly apart, hands clasped tightly in front of her. When Wade finally approached her, she found it difficult to meet his eyes. "Miss Wilson," he said formally, though his voice had softened. "Mr. Remington." She forced herself to look up at him. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Something flickered in his eyes. "I'm beginning to wonder if I already have." Before she could process his words, shouts erupted from the southern edge of camp. A rider was approaching at breakneck speed, one of the young prospectors who'd been working a claim a few miles away. "Raiders!" he yelled as he galloped into camp. Armed men heading this way, at least a dozen. The camp erupted in chaos. Men rushed for weapons while others began gathering valuables. "Who are they?" Wade demanded, grabbing the exhausted rider. "Don't know," the young man gasped. "Rough-looking bunch. They hit Weber's claim first, killed him and his partner, took everything." Wade's expression hardened. "How far?" "Maybe an hour behind me." Wade turned to Katherine. "Is there somewhere defensible nearby, somewhere you can take the injured men?" she thought quickly. "There's a box canyon about 2 miles north. Steep walls, narrow entrance. That'll have to do. Get Jenkins and anyone who can't fight up there." Wade was already issuing orders with the natural authority of a military commander. "The rest of you grab whatever weapons you have. We're going to set up an ambush." The next hour was a blur of activity. Katherine helped load Jenkins and 2 other injured miners into a wagon, along with the camp's gold stores and essential supplies. She was preparing to lead them to the canyon when Wade approached. "You should go with them," he said quietly. "No." Her response was immediate and firm. "My place is here. Katherine, I can shoot Mr. Remington better than some of your volunteers." She patted the rifle at her side. "My father made sure I could protect myself." Wade looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded curtly. "Stay near the back then, and if things go badly—" "They won't," she interrupted. "Not with you here." A strange expression crossed his face, surprise, followed by something deeper that made her breath catch. Then he was gone, organizing the men into positions. The raiders arrived just as the sun was starting to lower, casting long shadows across the camp. From her position behind an overturned wagon, Katherine could see them clearly, hard-faced men with mismatched clothing and well-used weapons. Their leader was a tall man with a distinctive red bandana. "Looks abandoned," one of them called out. "Check the tents," ordered the leader. "Find their gold." They dismounted, spreading out cautiously. Katherine held her breath, finger steady on her rifle's trigger. Wade had positioned men in a wide circle, planning to catch the raiders in crossfire. When the first shot rang out, the battle erupted suddenly and violently. Katherine found herself firing with mechanical precision, just as her father had taught her. The raiders, caught by surprise, scrambled for cover. "It's an ambush!" someone yelled. Katherine was so focused on reloading that she didn't notice a raider circling behind her position, until it was almost too late. She heard the crunch of boots on gravel and spun, raising her rifle, but the man was already bringing his pistol to bear. A shot cracked through the air and the raider collapsed. Wade appeared at her side, smoke still rising from his revolver. "You all right?" he demanded, eyes scanning her for injury. "Yes," she managed, heart pounding. "Thank you." "Stay low," he ordered before moving to another position. The firefight lasted less than 15 minutes. When it ended, 4 raiders lay dead, 3 were wounded, and the rest had fled back the way they came. The mining camp had suffered 2 men killed, several injured, but they had protected their home. Katherine moved among the wounded, applying bandages and comfort where she could. The sun had set by the time she finished, and she was bone-weary as she slumped beside the main fire where the miners had gathered. "They won't be the last," Wade was telling the others. "Word gets around about successful claims. You'll need to organize regular patrols, maybe hire some dedicated guards." "Can't afford that yet," Mercer replied glumly. "You can't afford not to," Wade countered. "What happened today was lucky. Next time might be different." Katherine watched him as he outlined a defense plan, his hands gesturing emphatically in the firelight. He seemed transformed, no longer just a bounty hunter passing through, but a man with purpose, a leader. The miners listened to him with the same respect they'd come to show her. Later, when most had gone to their tents to rest, Wade found her sitting alone by her own small fire. "You should sleep," he said, lowering himself to sit beside her. "So should you." She studied his profile, noticing the fatigue etched in the lines around his eyes. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd left this morning." "We would have managed," Katherine said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Wade turned to face her. "I've been chasing Turner for so long, I forgot there were other things worth fighting for." His eyes held hers steadily. Other people worth protecting. Katherine felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility opening up. "What about your partner? Your need for justice?" "Justice is still important," Wade said slowly. "But perhaps there's room for more than one purpose in a life." "And what purpose might that be, Mr. Remington?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm beginning to think that finding gold isn't the only treasure worth seeking in these mountains." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. Wade, shouts from the perimeter interrupted whatever she might have said. They both leapt to their feet as one of the lookouts came running. "Rider coming in. Single man, looks injured." They hurried to the edge of camp where the miners had their weapons trained on an approaching horse. The rider was slumped over in the saddle, barely staying mounted. As the horse entered the circle of lantern light, Wade stepped forward suddenly. "Hold your fire, I know that man." The rider raised his head weakly. "Remington, that you?" "Marshal," Wade said, helping the man down from his horse. "What happened?" "Turner," the man gasped. "Found him. Holed up in a cabin about 20 miles south. He wasn't alone, has a whole gang now." Katherine helped Wade get the injured man, apparently another bounty hunter named Frank Marshall, to her tent, where she could tend to the bullet wound in his shoulder. "He recognized me," Marshall continued as she worked. "Set an ambush. Killed Cooper and Williams. I barely got away." Wade's expression darkened. "How many men does he have?" "At least 15. Maybe more." Marshall winced as Katherine extracted the bullet. "They're planning something big. Heard them talking about hitting a shipment coming through Leavenworth next week. Gold from the Denver Mint." Wade and Katherine exchanged glances. "We need to warn the authorities," she said. "Tried that," Marshall replied bitterly. "Sheriff in the last town didn't believe me. Said I was just trying to claim the bounty without proof." "Then we'll have to stop them ourselves," Wade said grimly. "With what army?" Marshall demanded. You saw what happened to me, and I had 2 good men with me." Wade looked around at the mining camp, at the men who had successfully defended their home earlier that day. "I might have an idea about that." The next morning, Wade presented his plan to the miners. Turner and his gang are planning to hit a gold shipment. If they succeed, they'll have enough money to set up operations anywhere they want, including right back here, with more men and better weapons. "What's that got to do with us?" asked one of the miners. "Let the law handle it." "The law doesn't know," Wade replied, "and by the time they figure it out, it'll be too late." "Besides," he added, "that shipments carrying gold meant for banks throughout the territory, including the one in Leavenworth, where most of you have your savings." That got their attention. After much discussion and debate, 13 men volunteered to ride with Wade to intercept Turner's gang before they could attack the shipment. Katherine found Wade checking supplies as the men prepared to leave. "I'm coming too," she announced. He shook his head immediately. "It's too dangerous." "More dangerous than yesterday, or performing an amputation," she challenged. "You need everyone you can get, and I'm a good shot." "Katherine, besides," she continued, "you need someone who can ride ahead to warn the authorities if things go wrong. I'm the obvious choice since I can pass unremarked in town." Wade looked like he wanted to argue further but finally nodded. "All right, but you stay back from any fighting. Your job is to observe and, if necessary, get word to Leavenworth." They set out that afternoon, leaving enough men behind to protect the camp. Marshall remained behind as well, his injury too severe for travel. He provided detailed directions to the cabin where he'd encountered Turner. The group traveled through the night, making camp briefly before dawn. As they sat around a small, carefully shielded fire, Katherine found herself next to Wade. "You should try to rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "I was thinking the same about you," she replied with a small smile. "You haven't slept more than a few hours since the raid." "I'll sleep when Turner is brought to justice." Despite his words, exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. "Wade," Katherine said hesitantly, "what will you do after? Will you go back to bounty hunting?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think that was all I was good for. Tracking men, bringing them in dead or alive." His eyes met hers in the flickering light. "Now I'm not so sure. Because of what happened at the camp. Because of you," he said simply. "You've built something real there, Katherine, something worth protecting." Her breath caught. "It could always use more protection." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Is that an offer of employment, Miss Wilson?" "Perhaps something more permanent than that," she said boldly, surprising herself. Before Wade could respond, one of the lookouts returned to report movement ahead. The conversation was set aside as they prepared to move out. By mid-morning, they had located the cabin Marshall had described. It sat in a small clearing, with several horses tethered outside and smoke rising from the chimney. From their vantage point in the surrounding trees, they could see men moving about, at least 10 visible. "Turner's the tall one with the black vest," Wade whispered to Katherine as they observed through his spyglass. "See him there, giving orders." She nodded, studying the man responsible for so much violence. He looked ordinary enough, neither particularly menacing nor remarkable, which somehow made him more frightening. Wade outlined his plan to the miners. They would surround the cabin and call for Turner to surrender. If he refused, they would have to force the issue. "Remember, these men are killers," Wade warned. "They won't hesitate to shoot, and they're good at it. Stay in cover and don't take unnecessary risks." As the miners moved into position, Wade turned to Katherine. "You stay here. If shooting starts and it looks like we're losing, ride for Leavenworth as fast as you can." She nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." His hand briefly covered hers. "I've got something to come back for now." With that, he moved into position. Katherine watched nervously as the miners spread out, encircling the cabin. When everyone was in place, Wade's voice rang out clear and authoritative. "Jed Turner, this is Wade Remington. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." There was a moment of stunned silence from the cabin, then a flurry of activity as men rushed to windows and doors. A voice called back, presumably Turner's. "Remington, still chasing me? I figured you'd have given up by now. You know I won't stop, Turner, not after what you did to Davis." "Your partner was slow on the draw," Turner replied with casual cruelty. "Just like you're going to be." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Turner's men opened fire from the cabin windows while simultaneously, riders emerged from a nearby stand of trees, an ambush within an ambush. They'd been expected. Katherine watched in horror as the miners scrambled for better cover. Wade was pinned down behind a fallen log, returning fire methodically but clearly outnumbered. 2 miners were already down, and the others were being pushed back by the superior firepower. She remembered her promise to ride for help if things went badly, but the thought of leaving Wade and the others behind was unbearable. Instead, she reached for her rifle and began working her way around the perimeter, staying hidden in the trees. If she could reach a better position, perhaps she could provide covering fire. As she moved, Katherine spotted something that made her blood run cold. 3 of Turner's men were circling behind Wade's position. In moments, they would have him in a crossfire with no escape. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle and fired, dropping the lead rider. The other 2 swung toward her position, but her second shot caught another in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. The third man retreated, shouting a warning to the others. Her position revealed, Katherine knew she had only moments before they came for her. She ran toward Wade's location, bullets splintering trees around her. "Katherine," Wade shouted when he saw her. "Get down!" She dove behind his log just as a volley of shots peppered their position. "They were flanking you," she gasped. "You were supposed to get help and leave you to die," she retorted, reloading her rifle. "Not likely." Despite the dire situation, a flash of admiration crossed his face. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "You haven't met many women, have you?" she replied, drawing a surprised laugh from him even as bullets continued to fly overhead. The firefight continued for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes. Gradually, Katherine became aware that something had changed. The miners were advancing rather than retreating. Looking around, she realized that Turner's men were now the ones being surrounded. During the confusion, several miners had managed to circle behind the cabin. "We've got them boxed in," Wade realized. "If we can just..." A shot rang out, different from the others, the distinctive crack of a long-range rifle. One of Turner's men fell from a cabin window. Then another shot, another man down. "What's happening?" Katherine asked. Wade was scanning the ridge above them. "Someone's picking them off from up there." 3 more precision shots, 3 more of Turner's men down. The remaining gang members, realizing they were now caught in a deadly crossfire, began shouting about surrender. "Throw out your weapons," Wade called. "Hands where we can see them." One by one, guns clattered to the ground outside the cabin. Men emerged with hands raised, all except Turner, who remained inside. "It's over, Turner," Wade shouted. "You're the last one." "Not by a long shot, Remington," came the reply, followed by the sound of breaking glass from the back of the cabin. Wade was on his feet instantly, racing around the structure with Katherine close behind. They rounded the corner just in time to see Turner attempting to mount a horse. Wade tackled him before he could swing into the saddle, and both men went down hard. Katherine watched as they grappled in the dirt, Turner trying desperately to reach a knife in his boot. Wade, despite exhaustion and the strain of the past days, fought with grim determination. When Turner finally managed to draw the knife, Katherine didn't hesitate. She brought the butt of her rifle down on his wrist, causing him to drop the weapon with a howl of pain. Wade rolled away, coming up with his pistol drawn. "It's finished, Turner." The outlaw, realizing he was beaten, slumped back in defeat. "Should have known better than to underestimate you, Remington." "Not just me," Wade replied, glancing at Katherine with undisguised admiration. "Seems I had help you didn't account for." As they secured Turner and the surviving members of his gang, a lone rider approached from the ridge where the precision shots had come from. To everyone's surprise, it was Frank Marshall, his arm still bandaged but evidently well enough to have provided the crucial support that turned the tide. "Couldn't let you have all the glory, Remington," he said with a pained grin. "Besides, I owed Turner for Cooper and Williams." The journey back to Leavenworth was slow, hampered by prisoners and wounded men. When they finally reached the town 2 days later, the sheriff was stunned by the procession that entered his jurisdiction. 15 captured outlaws led by a ragtag group of miners, a wounded bounty hunter, a determined woman, and Wade Remington. "Turner's got a $5,000 bounty on his head," the sheriff informed them after the prisoners were secured. "Plus rewards for most of his gang. That's quite a haul. Split it between the miners and Marshall," Wade said immediately. "They earned it." "And what about you?" the sheriff asked. "Thought catching Turner was your personal mission." Wade's eyes found Katherine's across the room. "Let's just say I found something more valuable along the way." The next few days were filled with official statements, paperwork, and the distribution of reward money. Katherine discovered that the miners had voted to use part of their share to invest in proper security for the camp, including hiring 2 former soldiers as permanent guards. The evening before they were due to return to Broken Ridge, Katherine found Wade sitting alone on the hotel's porch, staring up at the stars. "Marshall's staying in town," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "Says his bounty hunting days are over." The doctor offered him a job as an assistant. "Good for him," Wade replied. "He's got steady hands, he'll do well." A comfortable silence fell between them. Finally, Katherine gathered her courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her mind. "And what about you? Now that Turner's been caught, what comes next?" Wade turned to face her, his expression serious. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether a certain mining camp might have room for one more resident." His voice was casual, but his eyes were intent on hers. "Preferably one who might be allowed to court the only woman there." Katherine's heart leapt. "I think that could be arranged, though I should warn you I have high standards. I would expect nothing less." A smile played at his lips. "After all, a woman who can perform surgery, fight off raiders, and help capture notorious outlaws deserves someone exceptional." "And is that what you're offering to be?" "Exceptional," she teased, even as her pulse quickened. Wade reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "I'm offering to try, every day, to be worthy of you, Katherine Wilson. Because in all my years of chasing gold and bounties across this territory, I've never found anything half as valuable as you." The journey back to Broken Ridge was different from any Katherine had experienced before. Where once she had felt alone among a camp of men, she now rode beside someone who looked at her as if she were the most precious discovery in the mountains. The miners welcomed them back as heroes, having already heard exaggerated tales of their exploits from those who had returned earlier. That evening, as the camp celebrated around a massive bonfire, Wade stood to address them. "I want to thank you all for what you did," he said, his deep voice carrying easily over the gathered crowd. "Not just for helping bring Turner to justice, but for showing me that there are things worth fighting for beyond vengeance." His eyes found Katherine in the crowd. "When I first arrived here, I thought the only gold worth finding was the kind you dig from the ground. I was wrong." He extended his hand to her, inviting her to join him. "Sometimes the most valuable things are right in front of us, if we're wise enough to recognize them." Katherine felt the eyes of the entire camp on her as she took his hand and stood beside him. Normally, such attention would have made her uncomfortable, but with Wade at her side, she found she didn't mind. "Miss Wilson has built something remarkable here," Wade continued, addressing the miners but keeping his eyes on her. "A community where people look out for each other, where everyone contributes according to their abilities, where a woman can earn respect not for what she is, but for what she does." He smiled down at her. "I'd like to be part of that if you'll have me." A cheer went up from the miners, who had come to respect Wade as much as they did Katherine. Old Mercer raised his cup in a toast. "To Miss Wilson and Remington, the heart and the shield of Broken Ridge." As the celebration continued around them, Wade led Katherine away from the noise to the quiet edge of camp. Under the vast canopy of stars, he took both her hands in his. "I meant what I said," he told her softly. "You're the only gold worth finding in these mountains. I think I knew it from the first moment I saw you, standing tall and unafraid in a place where most women wouldn't dare to tread. And yet you still went chasing after Turner," she pointed out with a smile. "A man doesn't change course overnight," Wade admitted. "But he can recognize when he's found something worth coming back for." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that gleamed in the moonlight, a small gold ring, simple but beautifully crafted. "I had this made in Leavenworth," he explained, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "It's not fancy, but it's solid, real, like what I feel for you." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Wade, I know it's fast," he continued hurriedly. "Too fast, maybe, but I've spent my life chasing after things, Katherine. For once, I'd like to stand still, build something that lasts." His eyes searched hers. "With you, if you'll have me." "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely. "Yes, I'll have you." As Wade slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, Katherine thought about the twisting path that had led her here, from a sheltered doctor's daughter to the backbone of a mining camp, to a woman in love with a former bounty hunter. None of it was what she had expected or planned, yet somehow it felt right. "I love you, Katherine Wilson," Wade whispered against her hair. "And I love you, Wade Remington," she replied, the words feeling both new and familiar on her tongue. In the years that followed, Broken Ridge grew from a struggling mining camp into a proper settlement. The original gold claim expanded, and with Wade's security measures and Katherine's business acumen, it became one of the most profitable operations in the territory. They built a proper house overlooking the camp, with a room dedicated to Katherine's medical practice, and another that served as Wade's office for his new role as the settlement's unofficial sheriff. They married 3 months after Turner's capture, in a ceremony attended by the entire camp, Frank Marshall, whose arm had healed nicely, and even the sheriff from Leavenworth. Old Jenkins, now fitted with a wooden leg crafted by one of the miners, gave the bride away. Their first child, a son they named William, arrived a year later, followed by a daughter, Sarah, 2 years after that. The children grew up surrounded by the unlikely family of miners, many of whom became honorary uncles. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Wade took Katherine to the spot where he had proposed. The camp below had grown into a small town, with a general store, a school, and several family homes where once there had been only tents. "Did you ever imagine it would become this?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they looked out over their community. Not in my wildest dreams, she admitted. When I came here, I was just trying to salvage something from my father's failed venture. And instead, you built all this. Pride colored his voice. We built it, she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. Together. Wade's face, more weathered now but still handsome, softened as he looked at her. Do you ever regret it? Staying here instead of returning to civilization, Katherine laughed. This is civilization, our version of it, anyway. And no, I have never once regretted my choice. She reached up to trace the scar along his jawline, a gesture that had become a habit over the years. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if you hadn't arrived when you did. I prefer not to think about that, he replied, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. Some things are meant to be, Katherine, like you and me. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Katherine reflected on how fitting it was that their love story had begun in a place where men came seeking fortunes. Wade had been right that first night by the fire. She was the real treasure of Broken Ridge, just as he had become hers. Come on, she said, taking his hand. The children will be waiting for us. Together, they walked back toward the lights of the settlement they had built, their lives intertwined as surely as their fingers were now. The gold band on her finger catching the last rays of the setting sun, a small circle of precious metal that represented something far more valuable than any mine could yield.